The house didn't breathe. It hummed. For 40 years, my husband Robert and I lived in a warm, creaky brick house in South Atlanta. It was a home that smelled of collard greens on Sundays, pine sol on Saturdays, and the rich, earthy scent of Robert's pipe tobacco. When it rained, the roof sang. But this house, my son-in-law Julian's multi-million-dollar smart fortress in the affluent suburbs, was dead. It anticipated my needs, adjusted the lights, and locked the doors, all without a single human touch. The low, synthetic hum of the central air conditioning unit was a constant reminder. A sterile, robotic female voice echoed softly from the ceiling. Temperature set to 68 degrees. Good evening, Maya. It was a machine. And right now, sitting on the edge of a stark white bed in this hyper-modern minimalist room, I felt like the broken cog trapped inside it. Smooth, unhurried footsteps approached on the hardwood floors out in the hall, followed by a sharp knock on my door. "Come in," I say. My voice still carrying the slight raspy drag that had lingered since my episode last month. The heavy mahogany door swung open and Julian Vance stepped in. At 42, he was impeccably groomed, wearing a tailored navy turtleneck that gave him the polished, predatory look of a Silicon Valley tech CEO. He didn't walk, he presented himself. He held a silver tray with a glass of water and a small plastic pill organizer. "Evening, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with that practiced focus group-tested empathy. "Time for your medication. We need to keep that blood pressure in check. Doctor's orders." I looked at the silver tray, then up at his face. As a forensic accountant, I had spent 35 years hunting ghosts in corporate ledgers. I made a career out of finding the missing decimal, the hidden offshore account, the slight hesitation in a CEO's voice when they swore they were broke. I knew what a lie looked like, and Julian's smile was the biggest lie I had ever seen. "Where is Chloe?" I asked, ignoring the tray. Julian's smile didn't falter, but a microscopic muscle near his left eye twitched. "Chloe is downstairs finalizing the catering for tomorrow's charity gala. You know how stressed she gets about optics. Besides, she thinks it's best if you have a quiet night. The neurologist was very clear, Maya. Your cognitive decline, the confusion, it's worsened by overstimulation." Cognitive decline. The phrase felt like a slap. 2 weeks after Robert's funeral, I had collapsed in my own kitchen. The doctors blamed it on a mild, transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke brought on by acute grief and hypertension. The next thing I knew, Julian had packed up my life, moved me into his guest wing, and stripped me of my car keys, my phone, and my independence. He was treating me like a crumbling monument. "I'm fine, Julian. Leave the tray," I said, keeping my gaze steady. "I'll wait until you take them," he insisted, his tone hardening just a fraction beneath the velvet exterior. "I promised Chloe I'd take good care of you." I didn't argue. Arguing was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to document my agitation. I picked up the small plastic cup, tipped the 3 pills into my mouth, and drank the water. He watched my throat work to swallow. Satisfied, he offered a curt nod. "Sleep well, Maya. The house will lock down at 10 p.m., he said. He stepped out, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The metallic clack of the digital deadbolt echoed in the quiet room, followed by the blink of a small red LED light on the electronic handle. I waited until his footsteps faded completely down the hall. Then I walked into the attached bathroom, bent over the porcelain sink, and spit the pills out into my palm. I had hidden them under my tongue. I turned on the faucet, washing away the saliva, and dried the pills on a towel. Putting on my reading glasses, I held the small blue pill up to the harsh vanity light. I had been taking lisinopril for my blood pressure for 5 years. I knew that pill the way I knew the back of my own hand. But as I stared at the chalky blue tablet Julian had just handed me, my auditor's brain began to ring a silent, deafening alarm. The color was a shade too pale. The manufacturer's imprint, usually a crisp stamped L, was blurry, almost completely rubbed off. And the weight, it felt infinitesimally lighter. I set the pill on the marble counter and used the back of my toothbrush to crush it. A real lisinopril tablet breaks with a clean snap. This one crumbled instantly into fine, powdery dust. I wet my pinky finger, touched the powder, and tasted it. My medication was coated, designed to be tasteless. This powder was bitter, acrid, metallic. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The gray hair, the tired eyes, the grieving widow. That was the narrative Julian was selling to my daughter, to the doctors, to the world. I didn't have a mini-stroke in my kitchen last month. My mind wasn't failing. I was being poisoned. And if the man sleeping one floor below me was willing to drug his wife's mother to fake her dementia, the real question wasn't how he was doing it. The real question was why. I scooped the powder into a small tissue, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the lining of my toiletry bag. The grieving widow was gone. The forensic accountant had just clocked in. The hardest part about realizing you are being hunted is pretending you don't see the traps. The next morning, the psychological warfare began in earnest. I woke up to find my reading glasses, which I always left on the nightstand, placed carefully at the bottom of my laundry hamper. The thermostat in my room, locked by Julian's master control, had been cranked up to a stifling 80 degrees while I slept, leaving me drenched in a disorienting sweat. When I walked down to the kitchen for breakfast, Chloe was rushing around the marble island, aggressively organizing floral arrangements for her charity gala. She looked up at me, her eyes sweeping over my damp forehead and slightly rumpled robe. Pity flashed in her eyes, followed quickly by exhaustion. "Mom, you look terrible," she said, her voice tight. "Did you wander again last night?" I stopped pouring my coffee. "Wander? Chloe, I went to sleep at 10 and didn't leave my room." The door was locked. Chloe sighed, a heavy theatrical sound, and pulled her phone from her designer apron. "Julian said the security sensors picked you up pacing the upstairs hallway at 3 in the morning. He said you were talking to Dad." My grip tightened on the ceramic mug. "Robert is dead, Chloe. I am fully aware of that. I was in my bed." "Mom, please, not today," she snapped, turning her back to me to aggressively trim a hydrangea stem. "Julian is trying so hard to keep you comfortable here, but it's becoming a lot. Just take your medicine and try to rest." The doctor said the paranoia would come in waves. I stared at my daughter's rigid posture. She wasn't just tired. She was terrified of any imperfection cracking the flawless facade she had built with Julian. She was so desperate to believe his curated reality that she was willing to write off her own mother's sanity. I didn't argue. An auditor knows that when the books are cooked, you don't confront the junior to the outside world. No calendar to track my days, no camera to document the discrepancies in this house, and no way to call for help without Julian knowing. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the perfectly manicured lawns of the neighborhood, feeling the walls of the smart house pressing in on me. Then the electronic lock on my door clicked. It wasn't the heavy, authoritative thud of Julian's master override. It was a softer manual beep. The heavy door cracked open just enough for a teenager to slip inside before closing it silently behind him. It was my 14-year-old grandson, Elijah. Unlike his father's polished veneer or his mother's frantic energy, Elijah was quiet, observant, and lived almost entirely behind the screen of his devices. He wore an oversized hoodie, his dark eyes darting nervously toward the ceiling where the house's integrated speaker system sat. "Elijah, why aren't you at school?" I asked, keeping my voice low instinctively. He didn't answer right away. He walked over to the armchair, pulled a heavy, modified gaming laptop from his backpack, and set it on my lap. "I faked a stomachache. Dad thinks I'm asleep in my room," he whispered, typing furiously on the keyboard. "Grandma, I need to show you something, but you have to promise not to freak out." I looked at the boy. His hands were trembling slightly. "I spent my life staring down embezzlers and tax frauds, baby. It takes a lot to make me freak out. Show me." Elijah brought up a video file. "Dad locked down the whole house network. He thinks he's the only admin, but he uses the same base code for his startup security, and I figured out a back door a few months ago so I could play games past midnight." He hit play. "I was looking at the security logs this morning because Mom was crying about you wandering around again." The video buffered for a second, then played. It was a black and white feed from the infrared camera in the upstairs hallway. The timestamp in the corner read 3:14 a.m. On the screen, a figure wearing my exact floral nightgown stepped out of my bedroom. The figure paced back and forth, waving its arms frantically. Then the audio kicked in. It was my voice. Exactly my voice. "Robert, where are the keys, Robert? The house is burning down. We have to go. Robert!" The voice wailed, sounding confused, terrified, and utterly broken. A chill, colder than the air conditioning, settled in my bones. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Elijah," I breathed, my eyes fixed on the footage. "That is not me." "I know it's not," Elijah whispered, pausing the video. He zoomed in on the figure's face. As the pixels enlarged, the truth revealed itself. The edges of the face blurred unnaturally against the background. The lighting on the cheekbones didn't match the shadows in the hallway. When the figure opened its mouth to scream, the teeth looked synthetic, almost blurry. "It's a deep fake, Grandma," Elijah said, his voice cracking with a mixture of awe and horror. "It's an AI-generated video and audio clone. He fed hours of your old home videos and voicemails into a generator. He's injecting these fake clips directly into the house's security server. When Mom checks the logs on her phone, this is what she sees." I leaned back in the chair, processing the sheer scale of the manipulation. He wasn't just poisoning my body to make me sluggish. He was poisoning my digital footprint. Julian was manufacturing a bulletproof medical history of severe, rapid-onset dementia. If I went to the police and claimed he was drugging me, he would simply show them this footage. He would show them the doctor's reports he had manipulated. I wouldn't look like a victim. I would look like a tragic, paranoid old woman losing her grip on reality. "He's building a cage out of code," I muttered, the auditor in me instantly categorizing the threat level. "And he's making your mother the primary witness to my insanity." Elijah looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. "Why is he doing this? Mom is talking about a power of attorney document. She said Dad told her you need to sign it so they can manage your care and protect your assets." Protect your assets. The oldest lie in the ledger. "Because he needs my money, Elijah," I said, my voice hardening into a cold, sharp edge. "Men like Julian don't go to these lengths unless they are desperate. The startup, the cars, this smart house. I bet my pension it's all built on a massive deficit." I reached out and gently closed the laptop. The fear that had been gnawing at me all morning evaporated, replaced by a hyper-focused, calculating rage. I wasn't an invalid. I was a forensic accountant, and my son-in-law had just made the biggest mistake a fraudster could make. He left a digital trail. "Elijah, I need a favor, and it is incredibly dangerous," I said, looking him dead in the eye. He swallowed hard but nodded. "What do you need?" "Julian has a home office downstairs, the one with the biometric lock on the door. He keeps his private servers in there, the ones not connected to this house's cloud. I need to get into that room, and I need access to his actual financial ledgers." Elijah shook his head frantically. "Grandma, I can't hack the biometric lock. It requires his actual fingerprint. And even if I could, he gets an alert on his phone the second that door opens." "I don't need you to hack the door," I replied, a plan already forming in my mind with the precision of a balance sheet. "I need you to wait for tomorrow night, during your mother's charity gala, when this house is full of people and Julian is distracted." I stood up, walking over to the bathroom door, looking at my toiletry bag where the fake lisinopril was hidden. "You just focus on disabling the camera in his office for exactly 15 minutes. I'll figure out how to get the door open." The charity gala sounded like money. From my bedroom on the second floor, I could hear the muffled, rhythmic thumping of a string quartet playing pop covers, the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, and the low, self-important hum of Atlanta's elite. Downstairs, Julian was playing the benevolent tech visionary, and Chloe was the perfect philanthropic wife. Upstairs, the forensic accountant was preparing to dismantle them both. I sat at my vanity, the harsh light illuminating a heavy crystal Scotch glass. Julian had left it on the kitchen island earlier that afternoon. Next to it, I had a roll of clear packing tape and a dark 6B sketching pencil I had taken from Elijah's backpack. It was an old trick, low-tech and gritty, but biometrics are only as smart as the physical world they interact with. I aggressively scribbled the pencil onto a sheet of paper until I had a small pile of graphite dust. Using a soft makeup brush, I dusted the crystal glass, revealing a perfect, oily thumbprint. Carefully, I pressed a square of packing tape over the print, peeling it away to capture the dark ridges of Julian's identity. I checked my watch, 9:15 p.m. Elijah had texted me a single period from his phone. The signal. The camera in Julian's office hallway was looping old footage. I had exactly 15 minutes. I slipped out of my room, my soft-soled slippers making no sound against the hardwood. The hallway was dark, the smart lights intentionally dimmed to keep the confused widow in bed. I moved with a steady, calculated calm, descending the back staircase that led to the private study. The heavy oak door of the office stood at the end of the corridor, guarded by a sleek, black biometric scanner. My heart hammered a heavy rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were dead steady. I pressed the graphite-dusted tape against the glass sensor, applying firm, even pressure. A red laser scanned the tape. The machine whirred, processing the fake ridges. For 2 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the light flashed green. A heavy metallic thunk echoed inside the door. I pushed the handle, slipping inside and letting the door click shut behind me. Julian's office was a shrine to his ego. Leather, dark wood, and a massive curved monitor dominating the glass desk. He was arrogant enough to believe his biometric lock was infallible, so he hadn't bothered to shut down his workstation. The screensaver was floating idly. I jiggled the mouse and the screen flared to life, demanding a password. I pulled a small silver USB drive from my pocket, Elijah's contribution. I plugged it into the back of the tower. A black command terminal popped up, lines of code racing down the screen as the payload bypassed the local Windows login. Within 30 seconds, I was in. I didn't waste time looking through his corporate startup files. Fraud is rarely kept where people expect to find it. I opened the hidden partitions, scanning for the anomalies. It took me less than 4 minutes to find a folder simply titled archived_ledger_Q3. I opened the spreadsheet and the screen flooded with red. It was a massacre. Julian's startup wasn't just failing, it had been dead for 2 years. He was hemorrhaging millions. But it was the secondary ledger, the shadow accounts, that made my blood run cold. He was floating the company's payroll using high-interest short-term loans from shell companies routed through the Cayman Islands. It wasn't venture capital, it was cartel money, and they were calling in their debts. He needs my money to pay off the wolves, I realized, my eyes scanning the massive deficit. I clicked into a subfolder labeled Estate Contingency. There it was, my entire financial portfolio, my retirement accounts, the equity in my and Robert's old house, my life insurance. Everything was meticulously cataloged, evaluated, and readied for liquidation. Then I opened the scanned PDFs of the power of attorney and the asset transfer agreements. The documents that would legally allow Julian to drain my accounts the moment the doctors declared me mentally incompetent. I zoomed in on the signature lines, expecting to see a clumsy forgery of my own name or Julian's aggressive scrawl as my designated proxy. Instead, I saw a familiar looping elegant cursive, Chloe Vance. The breath left my lungs as if I had been punched. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. It wasn't a forgery. It was Chloe's real signature. My daughter had co-signed the predatory loans. She had signed the medical directives granting Julian complete control over my psychiatric care. She was the secondary guarantor on the asset transfers. She didn't just look the other way. To protect her country club memberships, her galas, and her illusion of a perfect life, she had actively signed away her mother's freedom. A profound, shattering grief washed over me, heavy and suffocating. But an auditor cannot afford to grieve while the audit is ongoing. I began dragging the folders onto my own flash drive. Beep! The sound was soft, originating from the smart thermostat on the wall. Suddenly, the curved monitor went black. The hard drive clicked off. Beep! Beep! The electronic lock on the office door engaged with a loud, aggressive clack. I spun around, rushing to the door and grabbing the handle. It was dead. The keypad glowed a solid, angry red. Julian had a secondary offline alert system on his private server. He knew I was in here. A low hissing sound began to emanate from the central air vent above the desk. I looked up. The smart house's climate control system was shifting gears. The air in the room didn't just feel still. It felt thick, heavy. I remembered an article Julian had bragged about regarding his home's fire suppression system. Instead of water, the server room and his office were equipped to displace oxygen with carbon dioxide to choke out electrical fires without damaging the equipment. He had triggered the fire suppression system. He was going to suffocate me, and it would look like the confused old woman had wandered into the office, accidentally locked herself in, and panicked. The hissing grew louder. My chest tightened, a primal panic fighting against my rational mind. The air was already tasting metallic. I coughed, my lungs burning slightly. I had minutes before the CO2 concentration made me lose consciousness. I grabbed a heavy bronze paperweight from the desk and swung it as hard as I could at the reinforced glass of the window. It bounced off with a dull thud, barely leaving a scratch. Hurricane-grade glass. My breathing grew shallow. My vision began to spot with black at the edges. Think, Maya. Think like an engineer. This house was a fortress of code, but code relies on hardware, and hardware relies on electricity. The smart lock on the door was wired into the room's main electrical grid. I stumbled toward the wall outlet near the heavy mahogany bookshelf. I unclasped the thick 14-karat gold chain necklace Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. Gold is an incredible conductor of electricity. My hands were shaking violently as the oxygen depletion took hold. I grabbed a pair of metal letter openers from the desk. Using them like insulated chopsticks, I gripped the ends of the gold chain and jammed it violently directly into the exposed prongs of the smart wall outlet. There was a blinding flash of blue-white light and a deafening crack. The smell of ozone and burning metal filled the room. The gold chain melted instantly. The localized circuit breaker tripped violently. The lights overhead blew out, plunging the room into darkness. The hissing from the vent sputtered and died, and with a soft, mechanical whine, the magnetic seal on the heavy oak door failed. I threw my weight against the wood, bursting out into the hallway, gasping for the cool, oxygen-rich air. I collapsed onto the hardwood, my chest heaving, my lungs burning. The flash drive clutched so tightly in my fist that it was cutting into my palm. I had the ledger, I had the proof. But as I lay in the dark hallway, listening to the faint sound of string instruments still playing downstairs, I knew the war had only just begun. I wasn't fighting to save my family anymore. I was fighting to survive them. The smell of melted gold and scorched drywall clung to my clothes as I pushed myself off the hallway floor. My lungs were still screaming for oxygen, my hands trembling with the adrenaline of a near-death experience, but my mind was crystal clear. The flash drive in my palm was warm, practically humming with the radioactive weight of Julian's secrets. I couldn't go back to my room. The moment Julian checked his phone and saw the offline alert for his office, he would come upstairs. I had less than 3 minutes before the tech CEO realized his firewall had been breached by a 64-year-old widow. I bypassed the main staircase, where the laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses echoed upward, and slipped down the narrow service stairs used by the catering staff. The kitchen was a chaotic blur of white aprons, steaming plates of hors d'oeuvres, and shouting chefs. In the frenzy of the gala, an elderly woman in a dark robe slipping out the back pantry door didn't even register as a blip on their radar. The cold night air hit my face, shocking my system awake. I didn't stop. I walked through the manicured backyard, staying in the deep shadows of the towering privacy hedges, until I reached the wrought iron side gate. I slipped the latch and stepped out onto the quiet, affluent suburban street. I walked for exactly 2 miles. My slippers were shredded by the asphalt and my feet were bruised, but I didn't feel the pain. I walked until I reached a glowing neon sign of an all-night gas station sitting on the edge of the county line. I walked in, asked the cashier to borrow the landline, and dialed the only number I had bothered to memorize, besides my own. 30 minutes later, a beat-up, unmarked Ford Crown Victoria idled at the edge of the gas station parking lot. I opened the passenger door and slid in. The car smelled like stale black coffee and cheap cigars. Behind the wheel sat Marcus Mac Miller. Mac was a retired financial crimes investigator for the state, a man who had built his career tearing apart the offshore accounts of corrupt politicians. He had a face like a worn leather briefcase and a demeanor to match. We had worked 3 major embezzlement cases together in the late 90s. He trusted my numbers, and I trusted his badge. Mac took one look at my shredded slippers, my ash-stained robe, and the wild, sharp look in my eyes. He didn't ask how I was doing. "You look like hell, Maya," he grunted, putting the car in drive. "I've been dead for a month, Mac," I replied, staring out the windshield as we pulled onto the highway. I just decided to stop attending the funeral. We drove to Mac's apartment, a cluttered second-floor walk-up filled with stacks of legal boxes and outdated computer towers. It was off the grid, messy, and exactly the kind of place Julian's sleek algorithms couldn't touch. I tossed the flash drive onto his kitchen table. Air-gapped laptop, Mac. No Wi-Fi. No Bluetooth. If this connects to the internet for even a second, my son-in-law will trace the IP and wipe the drive remotely. Mac didn't ask questions. He pulled a heavy, military-grade Panasonic Toughbook from a drawer, booted it up, and inserted the drive. We sat shoulder to shoulder in the dim light of the kitchen, the blue glare of the screen illuminating the deep lines on our faces. I guided him through the encrypted folders, showing him the shadow ledgers, the cartel loans, and the terrifying deficit Julian had been hiding behind his startup's glossy veneer. He's over-leveraged by $12 million, Mac whistled low, scrolling through the offshore routing numbers. These lenders, Maya, these aren't banks. These are the kind of people who send a hitman to your house for being a week late on interest. No wonder he was trying to liquidate your estate. You were his bailout. Look at the medical directives, I said, pointing to the folder with Chloe's signature. My voice cracked just for a second before the auditor took over again. He was poisoning my blood pressure medication to fake a rapid-onset dementia diagnosis. Chloe co-signed the power of attorney. She handed him the keys to the vault. Mac's jaw tightened. I can take this to the district attorney tomorrow morning. We have him on wire fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. We can freeze his assets by noon. Wait, I said, my eyes catching a strangely titled subfolder at the very bottom of the directory. It was labeled archive_Sterling. Open that, I commanded. Mac double-clicked. The folder didn't contain financial spreadsheets. It contained medical records, legal filings, and scanned news clippings from 3 years ago. I read the headline of the first clipping. Silicon Valley tech executive David Sterling found dead in apparent suicide. David Sterling, Mac muttered, his brow furrowing. I remember that name. He was Julian's original co-founder when they launched the startup. The guy was a genius. Then he just snapped, locked himself in his garage with the car running. Open the medical records, I said, my heart turning to ice. Mac opened a PDF. It was a neurological evaluation. I scanned the symptoms listed by the doctor: severe paranoia, confusion, memory loss, wandering at night. I scrolled down to the diagnosis: early onset Alzheimer's. I felt the blood drain from my face. I opened the next document. It was a power of attorney form, transferring David Sterling's voting shares and company equity entirely to his business partner, Julian Vance. My God, Mac whispered, leaning back in his chair as the realization hit him. It wasn't a suicide, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. David Sterling didn't snap. Julian poisoned him. He manufactured a medical crisis, gaslit David into believing he was losing his mind, forced him to sign over his equity, and then murdered him to make it look like a tragic end to a terrible disease. Julian wasn't just a desperate fraudster trying to steal his mother-in-law's pension to cover his debts. He was a predator. He had built a flawless, repeatable blueprint for murder, weaponizing the medical and legal systems to liquidate human beings without leaving a trace. And Chloe was sleeping in a house with him. Worse, my grandchildren were sleeping in a house with him. My phone, the burner Mac had handed me when I walked in, buzzed violently on the table. I picked it up. It was a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the syntax immediately. It was Julian. He had bypassed my lack of a phone by messaging Mac's burner, which meant he was already inside Mac's supposedly secure network. The office door was a clever trick, Maya, the text read. But every ledger has to balance. You took my insurance policy, so I took yours. Attached to the text was a live photo. It was the back seat of Julian's SUV. Sitting there, looking terrified and confused in their pajamas, were 14-year-old Elijah and 8-year-old Zoe. The air in Mac's kitchen vanished. Julian didn't care about the gala, the optics, or the police anymore. The cornered animal had bared its teeth. He was making a run for it, and he had taken the only two things in the world I loved more than the truth. Mac, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal absolute 0. Get your gun. We aren't waiting for the DA. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when a mother's worst nightmare becomes a grandmother's reality. Mac didn't ask for a destination. He just reached into the battered metal lockbox under his kitchen sink, pulled out a matte black Glock 19, and racked the slide. The metallic clack was the only sound in the apartment. If he knows we're on my network, he knows we're calling the police, Mac said, his voice gravelly and low. He'll be changing cars, tossing their phones. He's a tech CEO, Maya. He knows how to disappear. He knows how to hide in the cloud, Mac, I replied, grabbing his tough book and the flash drive. But he forgot I grew up analog. As we rushed down the stairs to the Crown Victoria, I pulled Mac's burner phone from my pocket and opened a simple generic tracking app. Julian had confiscated my smartphone weeks ago, but he hadn't confiscated my 8-year-old granddaughter's favorite pink canvas backpack. Last week, when my gut first told me this house was a trap, I had cut a tiny slit in the inner lining of Zoe's bag, slipped in a $20 Apple AirTag, and stitched it back up. Julian thought he was playing 3D chess against a senile widow. He didn't realize the widow had already audited the board. A pulsating blue dot appeared on the screen, moving steadily north on Interstate 85, away from the city. "He's heading for the state line," I said, pointing to the screen. "He's got a 20-minute lead." Mac slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The Crown Victoria roared to life, tearing through the quiet suburban streets. For the next 40 minutes, the only light in the car came from the glow of the Tough Book on my lap and the GPS tracker on the phone. While Mac drove, I didn't pray. I worked. I kept the laptop entirely offline, diving deeper into the decrypted files from Julian's server. I wasn't looking for his crimes anymore. I already had those. I was looking for his escape route. An embezzler running from cartel debt doesn't flee empty-handed. He had a golden parachute hidden somewhere. It took me 32 minutes of cross-referencing shell companies and offshore routing numbers to find it. A master account in the Cayman Islands holding just over $4 million, the exact amount he needed to vanish. The blue dot on the phone screen slowed down, finally coming to a halt just off a rural exit near the South Carolina border. He stopped. I said. "The Pine View Motor Lodge. It's an old cash-only motel. No smart locks, no security cameras." Mac pulled the car off the highway, killing the headlights as we rolled onto the gravel parking lot of the dilapidated motel. The neon sign buzzed furiously above us, casting a sickly red glow over Julian's sleek black SUV parked outside room 12. Mac unholstered his weapon. "I'm calling the local sheriff. We wait for SWAT." "No," I said, my hand closing over his wrist. "Julian is a cornered animal holding my grandchildren. If he sees flashing lights, if he hears sirens, he will panic. He killed David Sterling to keep his reputation. He will kill them to keep his freedom. Maya, you can't go in there alone. He's dangerous." "He's a businessman, Mac," I said, stepping out of the car and clutching the heavy laptop to my chest like a shield. "And I'm about to negotiate." I walked across the crunching gravel, the cold night air biting at my lungs. I stopped in front of the peeling green paint of room 12. I didn't knock. I slammed my fist against the wood. "Julian," I shouted, my voice slicing through the silence. "It's Maya. Open the door. I have the drive." For 10 agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then the deadbolt clicked. The door opened just a fraction. Julian stood in the gap, and the polished Silicon Valley facade was completely gone. His eyes were bloodshot, his designer turtleneck stained with sweat. In his right hand, trembling slightly, he held a compact 9mm pistol. Beyond his shoulder, sitting on the edge of a stained mattress, were Elijah and Zoe. Zoe was crying silently into her brother's shoulder. Elijah looked terrified, but when he saw me, a flicker of hope crossed his face. "Step back," Julian hissed, waving the gun. I walked into the room, kicking the door shut behind me. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. "You're a stubborn old woman, Maya," he sneered, though his voice lacked its usual smooth arrogance. "You really think you can outsmart me? I built a $50 million company from the ground up." "You built a Ponzi scheme on top of a graveyard, Julian," I said evenly, setting the Tough Book onto the rickety circular table in the center of the room. "And right now, your creditors are coming to collect. Let the kids go to the car. You and I can settle the ledger." Julian laughed, a sharp, manic sound. He pressed the barrel of the gun against the laptop. "There is no ledger anymore. Chloe already signed the emergency asset transfers. Tomorrow morning, your accounts drain into mine, and you officially become a missing person with severe dementia. All I need is that flash drive and the decryption key to my server." He slid a mobile hotspot device across the table. "Connect the laptop. Log into my server. Give me the master control back, or I swear to God, Maya, I will shoot you right here and tell Chloe you attacked me in a manic episode." I looked at the gun, then at the terrified faces of my grandchildren. I didn't tremble. I didn't beg. I sat down in the plastic chair and opened the laptop. "You always underestimated me, Julian," I said softly, connecting the computer to his hotspot. The Wi-Fi signal flared to life. "You looked at me and saw a grieving, vulnerable widow. You forgot that I spent 3 decades dissecting men exactly like you. Arrogant men who think numbers are just a game." My fingers flew across the keyboard. I didn't open his server. I opened the backdoor routing program I had built in Mac's car while we were driving. I entered the offshore Cayman Islands account number I had found on his drive. "What are you doing?" Julian demanded, stepping closer, the gun shaking in his hand. "Enter the decryption key." "I'm balancing the books," I replied. I hit the final keystroke. The screen flashed green. Julian leaned over, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he read the confirmation screen on the laptop. It wasn't a server reset. It was a live wire transfer. "No! No, no, no!" Julian screamed, dropping the gun onto the table and frantically grabbing the laptop, his fingers mashing the keyboard. But it was too late. Using his own stolen administrative credentials, I had just initiated an irrevocable, instantaneous wire transfer of the entire $4.1 million from his hidden Cayman account. I didn't send it to myself. I dispersed it into 50 different anonymous charitable trusts across the globe and automatically flagged the original account to the IRS for international money laundering. "You're broke, Julian," I whispered, standing up as he stared at the screen, his breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. "The cartel money is gone. Your bailout is gone. Your balance is zero. You have absolutely nothing left." His leverage evaporated in a millisecond. The realization that he was financially ruined, hunted by the police, and now hunted by the cartel, hit him with the force of a freight train. He collapsed to his knees on the dirty carpet, clutching his head, a pathetic, broken shell of a man. I didn't look at him again. I walked past him, scooped Zoe into my arms, and put my hand on Elijah's back. "Come on, babies," I said softly. "We're going home." As I opened the motel door, Mac was waiting outside, his badge flashing in the red neon light, local squad cars already screaming down the highway toward us. Justice is rarely as clean as a balanced spreadsheet, but it has a way of settling the score. Julian Vance was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of David Sterling, multiple counts of wire fraud, and kidnapping. His tech empire collapsed overnight, leaving behind nothing but a cautionary tale in Silicon Valley. The hardest part of the audit, however, was my own daughter. Chloe didn't face prison time for her complicity, but she faced something much worse: the truth. Stripped of her wealth, her status, and her illusions, she was forced to confront the reality of what she had allowed to happen. The state granted me full permanent custody of Elijah and Zoe. Chloe is allowed supervised visits every other Sunday. She is trying to rebuild her life, but trust is a debt that takes a lifetime to repay. As for me, I sold Robert's old house and bought a new one. A warm, creaky, mid-century home in a quiet neighborhood. There are no smart locks, no voice-activated thermostats, no cameras watching us in the dark. Just the sound of my grandchildren laughing in the backyard, the smell of collard greens on a Sunday, and the peace of knowing that our foundation is finally built on the truth. Sometimes the world will try to tell you that you are weak, that your mind is fading, or that your time has passed. But as long as you know your own worth, no one can ever zero out your balance.